As I've just started a YouTube channel and I'm trying to improve my online presenting, and I've also been to loads of Zoom conferences and webinars recently, I thought I'd share my top tips for online presenting, those that I've learned and absorbed myself and those that I've learned from watching others, and I hope it's useful to you. The most important thing I've found before making any kind of presentation is to make a broad plan to prepare. You don't want it to be too specific because then you sound really stilted and end up looking at your notes all the time. So try not to rely on notes, but have everything kind of in your mind so you can speak naturally because you actually know your stuff, and have your presentation deck open already. And this is probably the biggest lesson I've learned recently, is to make sure you're already in a happy mood before you present. Otherwise, really it comes across, you know, the smile shows in your voice. So I've broken all these rules on some of the presentations that I've given recently, so nobody's perfect, but it is advisable. The other thing that I've kind of picked up really from watching YouTube videos and TED Talks, and also a guy called Simon Sinek that I refer to quite regularly, is to think about the pace of speech and how you convey your message. So some YouTubers, usually kind of the mid-teens, present in a very excited, rapid-fire way, and they're so excitable and they're on and they're completely shiny and they're amazing and all this kind of stuff. That style of presentation obviously doesn't suit me. I feel very uncomfortable speaking in that way. So I generally speak in a more paced and trying to be engaging kind of style. But there's also another style that I've observed recently. There's a lady called Susan Cain who talks about the power of introverts on TED Talks. And one of the things she does is draw you in using a very slow and mesmeric pace of speech. And she kind of welcomes you to her world and creates a relaxed atmosphere around the viewing of the video. So that means that when you're watching it, your brain starts to slow down and you kind of absorb what she's saying in a more deep and kind of memorable way. So I suggest experimenting with different speed and paces and styles until you find what works for you, but maybe also what works for the particular subject matter you're talking about on that day. The other important thing, and this is where happiness comes in, is to think about voice modulation very much like an orchestra playing. If your voice is monotone and dry, people will generally switch off. So one of the pieces of advice I've had recently is to make sure that you introduce higher and lower tones, that you modulate your voice, make it more excitable and interesting, and then slow it down, or make sure that the pitch goes up and down slightly as you're speaking, so that people will really retain their attention. So do show your face and be yourself on video. Top tip from watching something recently which was recorded, remember that the camera starts right away, and if you're looking to the ceiling and away from the audience, they've already gained an impression of you. It is possible to move your hands on screen and change your facial expression to draw people in, especially when you smile. It automatically engages your audience more. And probably the most important thing is to look interested in your own video, or I guess nobody else really will be, because if you're looking down and disengaged, then why would your audience want to pay attention? So on to attention span. This is really important, particularly for my daughter who's on online school at the moment, and she has 6 lessons a day, 40-minute lessons. They've deliberately reduced the timing of the lessons from an hour to 40 minutes because they realized that online it's much more difficult to concentrate on the content. So the next area is about attention span and how to keep your audience's attention. So to make yourself memorable, please be concise. It's really important to minimize the number of words you have on the slides because people will automatically read the slides and not look at you. Try and use relevant images instead so that your words are still remembered and the image is the overarching impression from your PowerPoint deck. Summarize and repeat key messages And don't be afraid of talking slowly when you do summarize and when you do repeat, because that actually embeds the information further into someone's mind. Thinking about using PowerPoint, I've used this story many times when given an example of a good speaker, a great speaker. There was one sales director I worked for who had one word on his screen. It was almost 15 years ago, so it's a miracle I still remember this. And it was the word remarkable, and he based his entire presentation around that word. You don't need loads of words on screen, you don't need loads of images to make an impression. People will actually focus on what you're saying more if you have a very singular kind of representation of what you're talking about. There's a don't here, so don't spend too much time on introductions. People kind of switch off. I've been watching loads of comedy videos recently to try and learn from them, and realized that I literally switch within a millisecond to the next video if someone spends too much time on the intro or just doesn't get into the content fast enough. You can lose your audience with long words. Either they don't understand them or don't absorb them. So obviously you can use long words, but perhaps just, you know, speak quite straightforwardly as much as possible. Don't apologize for your inexperience, because that actually fills time and your audience have switched off. They thought, you're inexperienced, this isn't relevant to me, I won't listen. Try not to look away too much from the camera or worry about over explaining. The amount of information that people are taking in is actually a lot less than you'd imagine. So over explaining or repeating yourself isn't a problem. And then finally, don't say finally and carry on talking for another 10 minutes. People have switched off at that word. And really, when you're thinking about the final cut and submitting to a YouTube channel or some other university portal, then think about the fact that in the live version, there may have been pauses, there may have been stumbles, there may have been mistakes or time to open a presentation, but you can actually cut those stumble moments out in the final cut that you submit and that is permanently available to your viewers. So please do take the time to edit your video and just take out some of the ums, ahs, and any kind of stumbles along the way. And those are really my top tips for Zoom presenting. I hope you enjoy your next one. Thank you for listening.